evidence of a kind of Enlightenment spirit comes out of the Americas in the person of Sor Juana Inéz de la Cruz. Sor, sister, she was a nun in Mexico for pretty much all of her adult life. A remarkable woman who has a fascinating life story of growing up in Mexico, struggling for access to education, clearly brilliant, but unable to get formally educated because prohibitions against that for girls. She becomes a nun by her admission, so that she can study, so that she can learn, and she is a remarkably productive writer as a nun. She wrote poems, she wrote plays, she wrote essays. She was an extraordinary figure in many, many respects. And the most information we have about her comes from her own pen in a letter she wrote, a public letter to another nun of sorts. It is the Repuesta Sor Filotea de la Cruz. Sor Filotea was was a pseudonym. Was not a sister at all. In fact, it was I believe it was the Archbishop. She had written something at an earlier date that was essentially a criticism on a point of theology, and it had never been published by her, but it had made the rounds in informal manuscript fashion until the local archbishop saw it and decided he wanted to teach her a lesson. So he published it and published his own letter to it, signing this fictitious name, taking on the guise of another nun, sort of hiding his own authority in that way. And the letter itself was essentially taking her to task for not so much the theology that she was arguing in her letter, but criticizing her for her non-religious, for her secular writings. And basically saying, you should just stay in your lane, little girl, and let's just try and all remember that we're all subservient to God. And the criticism that he was levying at her was that in this theological tract that she had issued, she had not been appropriately deferential to the establishment hierarchy of the church. And he was trying to get her back down in line. And she took some umbrage, it is fair to say, at this smackdown. And she responded in print in a public letter of sorts, where she published it to Sor Filotea, and she knew very well who it was. But in the in this letter, she goes through great detail in laying out her case for why she should be allowed to voice her opinion on issues of theology, why she should be allowed to study and consider and critique theology and the study of God and religious practices in general. And in effect, what she ends up doing is providing a serious argument, one of the first serious public arguments for women's rights, for women's equality in terms of the ability to study, the value of a woman's mind as opposed to, just being a housekeeping baby machine as they were supposed to be in societal mores of the time. And in this way, she's looked at as a kind of proto-feminist. People will look to her and latch onto her and say, oh, she's making this argument. And those critics tend to have their own agenda with her, so I'm not going to go there. But clearly she is making a very explicit case for women and for women's right to study and for the value of study in and of itself. And she does that in just spectacular fashion. And if you want to read a black belt smackdown, this is it, because she really just tears Sor Filotea to shreds. And it is a beautiful thing to watch. Now, the condescension, she seems to take some resentment to, and of the attack by Sor Filotea. And so she starts out this letter, and she does it in a way that is very rhetorically appropriate, and that is very on the surface quite humble. It's always declaring it's I'm just a simple nun. I am not the great eminence that you are, Sor Filotea. And she knows exactly who she's talking to, but still, in form and content, she is proving herself not only the equal of anyone else in that hierarchy that she is supposedly attacking, but she is in many ways proving probably their superior for the way she can manipulate language, for the way she can build an argument, for the way she can harness vast learning of classical and biblical texts, and do it all with honestly great panache. She drops right off the bat, my eminent lady, my senora, neither my will nor scant health nor reasonable apprehension has delayed my response for so many days. Is it any surprise that my dull pen stumbled over two impossibilities at its first step? My dull pen. Her pen is not dull. And then right away she starts dropping, for if the angelic doctor of the school, St. Thomas Aquinas, when questioned regarding his silence in the presence of Albertus Magnus, another great Aquinas' teacher, his teacher, replied that he was silent because he could find nothing to say worthy of Albertus, with how much more reason should I be silent? Name dropping, great fathers of the church, associating herself in that position of St. Thomas Aquinas, of being, not one to challenge the superiors, but clearly she is the superior, and she is showing that she can bounce around with all of these references and always use them very appropriately, very surgically, and have some fun with it, and just honestly bitch slap the authorities all over the place. She drops in classical references because in a couple of lines more we have quintillion. She's engaging in this Socratic question and answer from time to time, where she poses a question and then goes about answering it. She is a master rhetorician. It does not secrets of God. It does not say that he saw, but says what he cannot say. It does not say what he saw, but he says that he cannot say, and so it is necessary to say that those things that cannot be said. So it is understood that being silent does not mean having nothing to say, but that the great deal there is to say there is to say cannot be said in words, which, again, just coming at you sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo words, but honestly, that is Aquinas. That is Aquinas' ability to very logically and Socratically parse language down to get at the essence of a meaning, to get at some reduced core truth. And that's what she is engaging in here. She is doing St. Thomas Aquinas for her master, who maybe is not as good at that dance as she is, but she's just happy to go about it. I know very well that your most sage warnings is not directed at her studies of religion, but how much you have seen of my writings on human affairs. See, it's that straddling of the sacred and the divine, or the divine and the earthly realms, that they are saying is a bit of a problem. They want her to just pray and be a nun, and that's not what, she can't restrict herself like that. She has great trouble keeping inside the lines. Writing has never been my own volition, but at the behest of others, for I could truthfully say to them, ye have compelled me. Quoting scripture, she's always dropping quotations here and there, primarily from the Bible. Truth I will not deny, one, because it is widely known, and two, because if I have ever used it against me, God has favored me with a great love of the truth, is that ever since the first light of reason struck me, my inclination towards letters has been so strong and powerful that neither the reprimands of others, I have had many, nor my own reflections, I have engaged in more than a few, have sufficed to make me abandon the natural impulse that God placed in me. So now you see this balance that she's trying to find between faith and reason, which had bedeviled theologians and philosophers from, honestly, the beginning of time, the beginning of civilization. God gave me the ability to think. Why can I not use that? Why should I then just throw that out and assume that God doesn't want me to think? It is my right to use my reason because God instilled it in me. So how do I function with that, knowing that God gave me reason, the ability to think, but I'm just supposed to not think because you tell me that, so that's listening to you instead of God. It's a question that has had some history, let's say. And then she tells her story, her own personal story, about how when she was a young child, she used to tag around after her sister who was going to school and sort of like sneak lessons on the side. And then when she got a little bit older and it was really starting, that hunger to learn was really starting to catch in her, she went and she asked her mom to, dress me as a boy and send me to college, because girls were not allowed to go to college. And her mom refused to do that, but she, by little bits and snippets and reading in her grandfather's library and just whatever she could find, she latched onto, because she was so inspired in a almost divine way, and at least in the way she's couching it here. She is so inspired to learn that she cannot control that. So she, as she is getting a little bit older, presumably in the later teens or maybe even early teens, she decides, well, the opportunities are not very great for female scholars. And in fact, if I have basically two life paths that I can choose. Number one, I can get married. That's the common one. And if I do that, I'll be in the kitchen for the rest of my life, and I'll just have to conform and slip into that social role. But if I become a nun, I will be allowed to study. I'll be allowed to study scripture, primarily theology and devotional books, but I'll be allowed to study. I'll have access to books, perhaps outside the corpus of devotional writings. I'll be able to study others. And so that's the choice she takes. She says, I didn't really want to get married. I didn't much like the idea of, going and living and being a nun itself, but if it can buy me the right to study and to read and to learn, I'll do it. So she's laying out this story, and it has an effect, because who doesn't love a good story? The details of a individual life can tend to incur support, can draw empathy. And when you read of this charming little child who's begging her mom to dress her up as a boy and send her to college, I mean, it sounds like a sitcom pilot. It's just adorable. And you find yourself rooting for her. And she is writing this story very deliberately, saying, I am going to get the readers on my side, Sor Filotea, and they will support me, not so much you. So she tells this story, and it's inspiring, again, because we get charged with this thrill of learning that is so much a part of her character. And she uses that, because once she has that sense that, okay, the passions, the emotional investment in reading are there, so let's see what I can do with it. And she starts to analyze it. She starts to take a different look at it and say, well, it's not just because, I like studying, but it's that studying itself is good for me. And here's where she starts to rub up against some challenges, because as a female, as a woman, it's not supposed to be her thing. The Archbishop was concerned that she stay in her lane, and the challenge is that he's losing this battle, because she is charging out, and now she is questioning the very value of having that lane, and the idea that she should just focus on matters of religion. Religion is it. And she says, well, no, why? And then she starts to click off why studies outside religion help support the religious studies that she's doing. I thought it necessary to ascend the steps of human sciences and art in order to study theology and religion. You have to scaffold the primary a little bit. And then she goes through all of the so-called liberal arts and even adds a few more of her own to try and suggest exactly why all of these studies are so important. And she goes through them without logic, without logic, how can you understand the writings of Holy Scripture? Without rhetoric, how could I understand all of the poetic language in the Scriptures? Without physics, how could I understand questions of nature and animals? Without arithmetic, understand the computations of years? Without geometry, without architecture, without history, music, astronomy, layering on all of this to say that all of these liberal arts, all of these points of study support religion. And so by studying them, it helps with the understanding of Scripture and your duties as a nun. And so what she sees is this vast interlocking of knowledge bases where there is no single organization of them, but it's rather an intricate and almost bewildering pattern of interdependency of knowledge. And in this, I like to see a kind of bridge between medievalism and the Enlightenment. because in the medieval world, the world of patterns and the world around you is always so confusing, because there's all these patterns around you that you just don't understand, all these works of God that are so confounding, that are so awesome in the awe-striking way. But the ability to approach that from the mind and think that, okay, I'm going to start to puzzle this out, I'm going to lay it out, that's the enlightenment. And you can see in it the patterns of divine creation link this medieval mysticism with a kind of enlightenment deism also, because remember, the primary god of the European Enlightenment is the deist god, the clockmaker god, who sets a very intricate mechanism in place, establishes the laws of nature, and then steps back and is off doing other things. So that sense of this intricate patterning, this intricate working, this cog-like contextuality is very much an Enlightenment idea that she is sketching out for us and for Sor Filotea right there. And she is the whole time weaving these notions together with her story, so that she is just one more fold in this elaborate fabric of reality. And again, the very charming personal story that she tells along the way helps bring that in. It brings us along as readers. It's very deliberately put in there to try and cull some support, but it makes it easier for us to access these fairly abstruse notions sometimes. Well, I'm not quite sure I understand how, understanding music and geometry really helps with reading the Bible. Can you help me with that? Well, if I tell you a story, or if she tells you the story of her life, of her being a little girl and then growing up and the struggles she's had, it makes it easier. You get a vehicle for negotiating these difficult realms. And here it's a little bit of a humanist instinct, where the focus on the human life makes the abstract a little more manageable. And she tells, but continuing her story, she tells about how she has run up against resistance within her order, how one particular Mother Superior at her convent banned her from all books for a while there and told her, okay, no more studying. So she said, okay, it hurt, but I'm going to study anyway. I don't need the books. And she talked about how she just walks around in nature and notices things, and just everyday stuff. Like she sees two girls playing and she sees a top spinning, and these things spin off these wild analogies and connections in her mind that, with what she has read of Aristotle and all the classics. And that is her classroom, just going through life. And she talks specifically about, and this is really quite charming, the lesson she learns in the kitchen. Women know but kitchen philosophies, as she writes, about how she would consider like the different properties of an egg, and how you can mix it and how it reacts under certain things, and certain substances within it must react certain ways, and it is all it's all her school. She can make of it what she will. And she just goes into this in detail and detail and detail, again demonstrating for Sor Filotea, but also the reader and anybody else who's going to read it, because this is an open letter, that any denigration of her abilities as a scholar, or any limitation, is stupid, because she is clearly smarter than just about anybody out there. And in fact, at one point she directly addresses Sor Filotea again. Well, the whole thing is a letter, so the whole thing is a direct address. But it says that at one point, she says that, well, you know, you kind of attacked me in that letter, and you criticized me, and all right, I understand that, but I'm also kind of grateful because, in effect, predating Nietzsche, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And friends can come and give all these great compliments, and, well, that'll just feed the ego and make me a little cocky, and nothing good can come of that. But if people come at me with criticisms, cuts down the ego, makes me have to think my way out of that box, makes me have to confront that criticism, and makes me stronger. It is transformed into benefit. So after smacking Sor Filotea around for this entire long argument, in the end she just twists the knife that one last time to say, and everything you told me, it's made me better.